Hi, my name is Özgür Yılmaz. I am doing my doctorate in the Department of Journalism at Istanbul University. I am 28. I think that the fields of political science and communication studies have become closer to each other on many issues recently. Therefore, I will try to prove this thesis through the concepts I have determined. That's why I am recording this podcast. I hope you fun listening. Our first concept is biorobotics. Bio-robotics is a new multidisciplinary field that encompasses the use of biorobots as tools for biologists studying their behavior and as testbeds for the study and evaluation of biological algorithms for potential applications in engineering. Computing devices are used in contemporary biological and psychological research, not only as number crunching tools for the analysis of experimental data, but also to stimulate theoretical models of biological and cognitive systems. There are two broad classes of computer simulation studies in the existing scientific literature. A typical example of the first class is biomolecular simulation of the behavior of ion channels. Ion channels are proteins arranged to form pores in the cell membrane. Under certain chemical and psychological conditions, they undergo conformational changes that allow or hinder the movements of certain substances across the membrane. A detailed reconstruction of these changes is difficult to obtain with current molecular imaging technologies. Various experimental techniques can provide information about the dynamics of proteins and other biomolecules, but they are often limited. Computer simulations can be used to overcome these difficulties. The detailed molecular structure of a particular class of ion channels can be represented by a program, allowing the system to calculate the conformational changes that these channels will undergo under various chemical conditions according to the physical laws governing atomic interactions. Such simulations therefore serve as a computational microscope to reveal biomolecular mechanisms at spatial and temporal scales that are difficult to observe experimentally. Biomolecular simulations exemplify one of the roles computer simulations play in scientific research, that of generating data about the behavior of a system. In cognitive science and neuroscience, robots are often used as model-oriented simulations. For example, in bio-robotic studies, robots are used to evaluate theoretical models of human and animal behavior. Biorobotic model-driven simulation studies predate the creation of the first digital computer. The first example of biorobotic simulation dates back to 1913 when engineers John Hammond Jr. and Benjamin Meissner built a robot known as the electric dog that could track light sources through a simple sensory motor mechanism. Since this pioneering example, robots have been used to evaluate a variety of animal behavioral models. Like computational models routinely used in any field of science, biorobots can become part of the scientific cycle, making hypotheses and predictions, evaluating them in experiments, and repeatedly adapting them toward a scientific theory. Robots can be programmed to perform repeatable, parameterized experiments. They can be equipped with multiple sensors to watch variables, quantities of interest that are difficult to measure on an animal. Their morphology can be changed in systematic ways. They can make movements that can be dangerous for animals. They can perform movements that animals typically do not perform, allowing to explore whether animal movements optimize some criteria. Given to these computer and communication technologies, they can be controlled by digital models that replicate parts of the central nervous system in great detail. In short, robots can be used to perform some experiments that are difficult or even impossible to do with animals. In the long run, they may reduce the need for some animal testing. In addition to these positive effects of the biorobotic discipline, there are also some ethical problems. The use of biorobotic technologies for military purposes has raised ethical questions. For example, one of these questions is whether some technologies used by the army can be used for the public. Another ethical concern is whether biorobotic technologies are designed to not harm humans. The issue of privacy is also a recent concern in the field of biorobotics. Increasingly smaller sizes and developments in camera technology in the field of biorobotics bring to the fore the possibility of using biorobots for surveillance purposes. Our second concept is Brazilianization. Brazilianization has many different uses. First of all, Brazilianization describes the transformation of the living spaces of different social and income groups into surrounded communities. In this context, it differs from the concept of Balkanization, which expresses the conflicts of different ethnic and religious structures in a certain region. According to a second usage, Brazilianization is based on a concept that expresses the increasing number of workers in the 1990s with globalization, and that these workers are individuals, not a social movement. In this context, Brazilianization means precarization. In this process of insecurity that progresses with globalization in Brazil, multinational companies dominate the economy. These companies employ thousands of professionals and manage multiple supply chains. Worker communities of part-time professionals serve as a reserve army for these companies. Daily life in valleys, which some estimates claim represents 40% of Brazil's economy, is difficult and the informal economy dominates. The state, which is in a weak position against the neoliberalization wave that started in the 1970s in Brazil, is taking economic measures. However, this neoliberalization process, which progresses with the support of the state, has led to instability rather than stability. In this context, it is noteworthy that the political content of both uses intensifies. However, some contents of the concept of Brazilianization that are relevant to the field of communication today will be put forward here. As suggested in the first use of the concept, Brazilianization corresponds to a separation between different social groups. This separation brings to mind filter bubbles, echo chambers, and cultural ghettos. Echo chambers and filter bubbles describe how people connect with each other online, offline, in personal, social, and professional networks. Echo chambers and filter bubbles reveal significant breaks in the network. So it occurs when certain groups and communities separate from the rest of the network. Echo chambers and filter bubbles aren't just limited in social media. However, the more visible and measurable nature of social media has rekindled the debate about echo chambers and filter bubbles. Cultural ghetto can be defined as the separation of a community due to cultural reasons, just like echo chambers and filter bubbles. However, although the concept of Brazilianization proposed in this section is generally parallel to these three concepts, it differs on one point. The boundaries drawn by the concept of Brazilianization with the society in general are sharper and more specific. Our third concept is big data. At its most basic, data is an abstraction about a real-world entity. The history of data recording dates back to 3000 BC. However, in the last 200 years, data has started to become digital. Economic and state actors, such as the insurance and banking sectors and secret intelligence service, have been collecting data about individuals for a long time. But making this data machine-readable is a relatively new phenomenon. Big data refers to doing things on a large scale that cannot be done on a smaller scale, gaining new perspectives or creating new forms of value. Big data analysis describes the situation in which things that could never be measured, stored, analyzed, and shaped before becoming datatable. The development in digital media technologies has expanded the field of big data. Big data, which analyzes large amounts of digital objects stored on digital devices, operates with an ideology. This ideology states that big data analysis is a necessity and opportunity for the economy and society. However, the use of big data analysis for surveillance purposes has led to the process of ensuring economic and political control. The use of big data for surveillance purposes is legitimized by capitalists with some suggestions, such as personalized medicine in the field of health. Big data is used to create understandings of political, economic, and social life through communication on social media platforms. In the economic field, big data is used to understand consumers' individual preferences, tastes, and behavioral choices, leading to targeted advertising and advertising strategy from which social media platforms profit. In the political arena, big data's inability to predict which actions are carried out by which subjects, robots, algorithms, or humans, and the effective use of this field by far-right ideology have increased the unpredictability of politics. Big data not only affects the nature of politics, it also has the potential to change the way information-based work is done and reduce the number of these jobs, and human nature phenomena such as experience and judgment can be replaced by predictions derived from data. Another important topic in big data and prediction is machine learning. Machine learning primarily aims to train an algorithm on how to generalize and does this with data. The more data an algorithm includes for training, the better it can recognize features and useful classifiers and identify clusters it is likely to distinguish. The ultimate goal here is unsupervised feature learning, in which an algorithm generates ideas on its own about what stands out in the world without anyone telling it what to look for. Such a system not only develops a view of the world from its first principles, but also does so moment by moment. Our fourth concept is magical voluntarism. Magical voluntarism is defined by Mark Fisher, who proposed the concept as the belief that each individual has the power to make themselves whatever they want to be. According to Fisher, the concept is the dominant ideology and unofficial religion of contemporary capitalist society. Magical volunteering reproduces neoliberal ideology by making people responsible for failure, saying if you can't succeed, it's because you don't want it bad enough. Magical volunteering is both the result and cause of historical low levels of class consciousness. The concept is the flip side of depression. Its basic claim is that everyone is somehow responsible for their own unhappiness and therefore deserves depression. The concept of magical voluntariness brings to mind Antonio Gramsci's concept of consent production. The concept of consent production is the directing of the working class to understand their social experiences with ideas that do not belong to them. In this way, the class expresses itself with ideas that do not belong to itself and belong to capital, and thus legitimizes the dominance of capital. However, consent is not a stable state and must be constantly reproduced. Unlike consent production, magical voluntarism considers the effects of neoliberal ideology on individuals. Magical voluntarism not only reveals the narrative of capital to individuals, but also constantly reproduces the feelings of defeat created by neoliberal ideology in individuals.